trends for 2022, we've got a very structured approach on how we're going to do this. From what I understand. So myself, I am going to look at technology trends in general. I would have to say for 2022, it's not much different from 2021. Moving forward, technology trends I'm seeing for 2022 is still about digitalization, right? And especially in Malaysia, you know how we had that whole big national level My Digital Blueprint, right? And there was a lot of talk about data centers and so on and so forth. Going into 2022, there will be perhaps a little bit more fine-grained detail, a little bit more zooming into further into what makes digitalization in Malaysia possible. So like the key elements would be connectivity, internet, 5G, and then also data centers. Then there will be the representations of digitalization. How do we know it's working in the country? How do we see the presence of digitalization? This would be, main ones would be, for example, e-commerce in the country. Our digital economy is expected to thrive. We've got huge hopes when it comes to that. And then there will be the emergence of mobile apps. That's going to be more active as usual. Then IT operations and cloud, multi-cloud and more. And then there will be the outcomes of all of this, which is, of course, data management, especially when it comes to cross-border, right? Data flows that have to cross country borders. A lot more of this, I think, is going to happen because of remote working, especially during the pandemic. A lot of organizations realize, hey, remote working is great. Most of them are saying they would like to continue with that. And a new trend I'm seeing also is that organizations are starting to hire talents that aren't necessarily in the same country as them. So what does that mean? Cross-border data flow, then there'll be payment data as well, which will have to cross borders because of our talents in other countries. This will involve regulation, of course. So for me, at least, these are the areas I will be keeping an eye on for 2022.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to SecurityLAH Podcast, Season 2.
Welcome to Season 2 of SecurityLAH Podcast. Thank you, Kat.
I have a question for you. I know you covered briefly on some of the trends, but now with the pandemic and hopefully we are moving towards the phase of endemic, people have started traveling and organizations have gotten into this mode where suddenly work from home is sexy. And I'm curious to note if 2022 we are going to see trends that thread along the same lines, or is it going to be something different?
For 2022, I actually spoke to a very learned and expert gentleman about working trends. In general, I would have to say work from home, it figured very largely because of during the pandemic, right? Everybody was in lockdown as much as possible. The majority of the workforce had to work from home. Here and there, I was hearing some big organizations also playing around with different formats. For example, having a certain percentage of their workforce come into office on certain days, and then on the remainder days, on the other days, the rest of the workforce will go into office. So there is a term for it. I'm sorry, I can't remember. I think it's there was some ratio thing that was called to describe what it is. So there is also one option that organizations, MNCs are looking at as well. So not just work from home, but remote working, and then also possibly going into the office a few times a week.
But I also see emergence of organizations that now says that I don't need an office. I can cut my cost, because if you look at it, rental is huge. And a lot of organizations had to vacate their work premises due to lack of business, due to closures, due to movement control orders. So do you see virtual working as a means of working in the future for organizations or even startups, for that matter of fact, where they start seeing a trend in not the old school type of working, but having everything in a digital presence?
Yes, I do. Roles which we used to think would need everybody in the office to be able to work, like, for example, engineering. I'm hearing of things like, for example, one engineering team actually collaborating with another engineering team in another country. They could be at different time zones, but yeah, these kind of things are even happening. So just imagine if a function like engineering for an organization is able to work that way. What more for office workers?
Thank you, Kat, for that wonderful explanation. Now I'm going to move to Prof. Prof, you're the resident expert in data and privacy. What do you see is going to be the trends coming in 2022?
Well, actually, I was going to say, I don't consider myself an authority enough to be able to predict, other than referring to my snowball book. But for privacy, data and privacy, before we talk about that, I recall to my mind a quote that I like very much is by Feynman, Professor Feynman, is that the first principle is that I must not fool myself, and I am the easiest to fool. So I have that attitude in regard to privacy. If we look at the situation realistically, the pandemic has continued, and it will continue to accelerate digitalization across all sectors. And from what we have discussed in the past, there were leaks, many instances of reported unofficial information on leaks and stuff like that. So the big question that I always have is, do we have privacy and other things that we do really to provide privacy? Or is it because we fear the consequences of not having control over information? So for 2022, I think not much is going to change in that, number one, regulatory efforts has not caught up with the actual situation, but they will try and much will be done. We can see this from the changes in various regulations, like in China, GDPR, and in various parts of even Asian countries, if you look at it in a narrower scope. There has been progress, but they are fragmented. So I would say that next year, this trend will continue, and where a lot of different entities will look into it and continue to see what they can do. So, but it will also continue to be a concern among consumers. With the increased level of awareness, consumers will be more demanding, and they will demand to know why information is collected and how it will be used and who will be accountable. So companies will need to provide assurance on their part and as part of their risk management. The third thing is, I think the interplay between cybersecurity and privacy will continue, and it will become one of the four core issues that various agencies need to look at. National-wide, I think there will continue to be a justification for many incidents or events that could happen, such as monitoring, and to justify why they need to monitor, why they need to collect certain data, and why they need to track. And all of this, unfortunately, in my opinion, will do more harm than good. They will further erode privacy of individuals. Companies will have a very tough time implementing it. For the consumers, it seems even more bleak, because I recall one research work that was done back in 2018. It paints a very realistic picture, but a sad one, in that it says privacy is for the rich and influential only. But that has to change so that we do not allow privacy to be monetized. In the year to come, I see that this trend will continue. So it is up to the various regulatory bodies and companies to work on it. There is still a lot that needs to be done, but public relations cannot be more important than actually providing privacy to users. That's how I look at it in next year.
You touched on regulatory framework. Do you foresee a more stringent regulatory framework, or are you looking at a more laxed approach? There's an imbalance even in business. For example, a startup may not even look at security or data privacy or even data secrecy, for that matter of fact, versus a licensed, regulated environment. Do you see this changing in the coming years? Because we are moving towards more and more data-centric lifestyle. So, for example, for some people, they may say that, okay, I don't want to be part of the social media. That's fine. But data about that person will still be in that social media network. For example, someone may be posting a picture of me with another friend, and that friend may be posting it in his social media account, tagging me or anyone else, which means that I am unwillingly have become a subject person in that network. So from that perspective, do you see concepts such as right to be forgotten? Is it a utopian dream, or is it something that's possible?
You are absolutely right in many of the points that you highlighted. On the one hand, if you look at the situation now, as we advance in terms of technology and digitalizations, it would appear that we have gotten more. But the underlying question is, do we really? I don't think so. In fact, we have lost even more. Okay? And I did answer the other point that you have in terms of regulatory. I do think it will get tighter due to demands from various aspects. But then, however, as I said, national policy will continue to be the justification for many of the things that we do. Now, I'll leave it to the listeners and everyone here to decide how they want to interpret this situation. For individual users, what is the best way for you to take control and take charge of your own data? Well, I would say don't use it if you're talking about social media, but then you cannot control another person from sharing information about you in a social media. And truly, there isn't any regulatory which is sufficient to address this issue. There will continue to be push and demands from various parties. But whether anything realistic could be done, I don't think so, which is why I said public relations need to take a back seat and organizations need to seriously look into and understanding why privacy. Why privacy is a very simple question. But to answer that question requires us to look into many things. What is meant by privacy? In what context? How do we assure privacy? What kind of promises? And until we are able to sort this out, okay, we will not be able to fully answer and give privacy. That's how I see it.
Great. Thank you, Prof. Very insightful. Although I fear to step into 2022 and wonder if my data is going to still be secure or it's going to be leaked somewhere. I guess today leaks are just part of our life. I think we are so desensitized to the point where, oh, okay, another leak. Oh, is my data is going to be there? Yeah, it's most likely going to be there. So, well, I hope things do change. I do hope that, I mean, the only way I see it changing, to be honest, is for government and regulators to step in and put in some meat into the regulations so that the industry starts moving in the right direction. Given a choice, industry would take the path of least resistance so that they could just go on doing their own business without incurring additional costs. Because for any compliance matter, whether it's security or privacy, there's always a price tag attached to it. And that's something that organizations don't want to get into a conversation with.
I hope so too, because actually the only way to go about it, I agree with you, is the government and with the right legislations and stuff like that. But however, as long as we continue to go in a fragmented way of doing things, then I'm afraid the progress would be slow. But then not all is lost. There is still a chance where if we call for more to work alongside each others, then there is still a chance of seeing the light at the end of the tunnel.
Enjoying the show so far? Subscribe now so that you don't miss out on the latest episode. We are available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and many other platforms. Visit podcast.securitylah.asia to get the links to subscribe.
Oh, great stuff. Kat, you wanted to mention something about virtual working and all that. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. So to your question about virtual working teams, whether it's suitable for them to still exist as we move forward out of the pandemic, right, towards an endemic. It depends on the industry. Actually, even during the pandemic, during lockdowns, there were critical industries which still required people to go into work. Like, for example, warehousing. The warehousing industry still requires humans. It always will, until there is wider adoption of robotics and automation. Our frontliners also had to show up to work. They have to be physically at work, like road sweepers, nurses, doctors, law enforcement. In the cybersecurity industry, is it possible for a SOC team, for example, to work virtually? Maybe that's a question that yourself and Nigel can answer. But for enterprises and office workers, most likely is a hybrid method. I hope it's a hybrid method, because in a way I'm an office worker, and I'm glad that I'm able to go to office when I wish, and work remotely from another location when I want to.
Great. Now, Nigel, I hear you have some points on the latest security trends and technology and threats. Go right ahead.
Thanks, Doc. So I was just digging up a little bit, trying to understand what the trends, and also based on what I've been seeing some time ago. And I kind of agree with Kat and what Prof mentioned earlier also. Some of the things that they said would definitely think that we would see in 2022 also. Let me start off with at least with phishing, malware, and ransomware, right? I believe these are attacks that will continue growing, and we will definitely see a lot more attacks in 2022. The reason for this is simple, right? Because the cost for this attack is pretty low. It just requires you to send probably a phishing email or malware, expect someone to click it, and you're in. If you think about it from just purely from a cost perspective, this is a good way for an attacker to get through. Recently, there were some other articles that indicated that cyber criminals are looking to cut down costs. They were looking to hire technology professionals into the world of crime, and this was so that they did not share their profits with other cybercrime groups. So if you think about it, even criminals are looking to cut costs. And if you consider all these things, then definitely malware, phishing, and ransomware would be things that will continue happening, in fact. Then you also have ransomware as a service. I mean, you don't really need any skills to have or use this kind of technology, right? You just pay someone and you're done. It's just a service that someone provides, you pay them for it, and you have a working malware or a ransomware for that matter. So definitely these are things like phishing, malware, ransomware will continue growing. Another thing that I see is you would see a lot of IoT and API related attacks. Again, more of API, and I say IoT is because we live in a connected world. So a lot of interconnectivity is going to take place, a lot of interconnection between devices will continue happening, and everything works mostly on APIs. And so that's why you will see a lot of API and IoT related attacks. In fact, if you've seen the OWASP top 10, right, the number one vulnerability that they consider number one threat is broken access control. And this is primarily to do with IoT and APIs. A lot of incidents recently with APIs are related to access controls or missing controls in place or broken controls for that matter. So we will see attacks related to that, or at least I would expect to see something on those lines. We would also possibly see supply chain attacks. So Now, when you think about technology controls, I as an organization may put in all the controls that I have and try to protect my organization as to the best of my ability. But if someone cannot get through my front door, they might walk down the chimney, right? So supply chain is similar to that. What they might do is they would try to attack a vendor or someone else who works with me and try to break in from there. So these are things that we've recently seen with, I think it was Microsoft sometime back. There were certain attacks with them. So this attack most likely will continue. We would also see AI ML related attacks. Now, with the cost of processing power or processing going down, there's a good chance for a lot of AI and ML related attacks to come to surface. One of them is again, deepfakes, and not just video. You also have deepfake audio. There were certain incidents recently where people received phone calls which were not really from the person they were expecting, and they transferred money across and things like this. So definitely, these are things that which may surface, I would say. We also have something that Kat mentioned, right? Remote working. So with remote working, work from home, you're definitely going to see a lot more cloud-related attacks. Not necessarily cloud-related, but with the way things are moving towards, you would see a lot of attacks on cloud. And to drive all these things, you are seeing a lot of zero trust networks, right? People are looking for zero trust networks. I would see some changes on that front also. In addition to that, I think, and again, this is not something for 2022, but I think in the next maybe year or two, we could definitely see a lot more laws related to privacy, that come across, that start popping up. Recently, I mean, after GDPR, certain other countries started picking that up. China is coming up with their own law. As far as I know, India is building on something like that. So across Asia and maybe across other parts of the world, also this is something that will slowly pick on. Then there is also drones, right? So for those of you who have actually seen some, recently there was Japan had a flying car and they certified it as being safe, safe for use. So they have a safety certificate issued for this particular flying vehicle, right? So drone security, definitely that is something that's going to come into the picture. Maybe not right now, maybe 2 years down the line. But with new technology, you will have new threats. And with new threats, you definitely will have new security problems. So I think these are the things that I foresee for, at least I would say that 2022 would bring, and maybe somewhere a little ahead after 2022 also.
Oh, thanks, Nigel. I note an interesting point. You spoke about attacks, AI, ML. So just wondering, is it attack against AI, ML where someone launches an attack? Like, for example, there was a video where, a self-driving car just stops in the middle of the road because it thinks it saw something, but actually there was nothing there. Is it those kind of attacks? Or are you referring to attacks that actually use AI, ML to fuel it?
I would say attacks that actually use AI ML to fuel it. And the reason is, again, like I mentioned, processing power is becoming cheap. A lot of people have access to AI-related technologies, building applications and solutions related to AI and ML. And due to this, we would see new attacks. I mean, if you think about it, right? If you can train a particular bot to push certain attacks, I mean, it makes your work a lot easier. You don't really have to do the heavy lifting anymore. So you just train a particular bot to do something for you. It takes care of it from there. Similarly, with deep voice, again, a lot of fraud, right? You have someone making a phone call. You have a conversation, try to convince the other person, and then you're done. Recently, there was a video, and again, this was not really an attack, but it was a commercial where they used AI to actually create a lot of videos so that you can target particular stores and things like this. So if you consider the use of like this technology, for in this kind of use cases, they can definitely be used against it also.
Great stuff. So I'm going to wrap it up with a quick look about what I feel is going to be the direction of generally the industry moving forward into the next year. And the first one that I wanted to cover is that the higher level of management and senior leadership teams are going to start taking security more seriously. As you see more breaches happening in the organizations, the role CISO is going to be more prominent. And what I foresee is that there's going to be a lot of discussion as to who the CISO is going to report to. Should it still remain within the IT or the technology thrust, or should it be critical enough to report to the CEO, or should it have a direct reporting line to the board? And that's because businesses now see cyber security risk as a key business risk. And a lot of organizations today cannot operate if their infrastructure, the system goes down. So that's going to be a key point. And with that, you may even see them leapfrogging and say, you know what, let's not just stop at hiring a C-level for cyber. Let's look at someone with cyber savvy knowledge to be part of the board, to guide the board to make the right decision. Now, we've gone past the stage where we looked at IT savvy people because that's done and dusted. You see a lot of regulatory bodies have made it mandated to say that you need someone who understands IT so that you can look at technology risks, you can look at cyber risks. But because cyber has grown so much in the past few years, it now warrants for company owners to start looking at cyber as something that's very critical for the organization, and start looking at how they could make sure that the upper echelon of the organization has the right level of decision making in order for them to say that, yeah, we've taken care of this risk. We have people at the right level with the right skill set to make the right decisions. In order for the organization to have the right level of governance, compliance, as well as direction in order for the business to move forward. The next one that I think is going to be big, if it already has not, is what we call the identity first security. Now, the identity first security is where you're looking at access granted based on who requires it, why do they require it, where are they coming from, and for what purpose. Now, some people may call it zero trust, some people may call it anything else, but essentially looking at the environment of how you're operating. Traditionally, all of us used to be in the office. We had fixed network points, or we used to have a secure Wi-Fi. We only use corporate issued laptops. We had the whole slew of security suite in the laptop that practically at times prevent you from even being able to do your work. But today, businesses are looking at things differently. People are working at home, out of the secure enclave of the network. Some people may say, fine, I will use my own machine, just give me an access to the corporate network. And you have technologies like remote desktop or Citrix workstation or even Amazon client base for you to be able to access to your corporate network. So the question would really now be, how do we move from where we were, the traditional way of doing work, into the way of work today? You see users are demanding more and more autonomy into data and access. They want to be able to do work on their personal devices. They want to be able to do work on their mobile devices or their tablets. So democratization from a firewalled environment into the vast open wild west of the internet now becomes a key requirement in order for productivity to be key. And we saw this being tested during the pandemic. People wanted to work from home, they need to have secure access. And you started seeing organizations at times saying that the easy way for me is just to give you VPN access. But then, if you don't control where that person has access to, you practically give the person backdoor access into the organization. Organizations are re-looking at, is it necessary? And with that, we also look at the advent of what remote working is. Because at the end of the day, if you do hire someone and you tell the person, okay, you're going to start work remotely, chances are you're not going to send the person a corporate asset with all the bells and whistles and everything put into the machine. You are essentially admitting an unsecured machine into most likely a secure environment. So how do you ensure this? So this has to be something that, as an organization, to relook at the whole perspective. And by this perspective, what I mentioned is that relooking at how policies are being enforced, relooking at what a person can technically do with his or her machine. The traditional way of making sure that your assets are fully controlled, you have right up to the end policies to make sure that the devices can only do what they want to do, is no longer applicable. Debate is happening about, look, I don't want any software controlling or even having visibility to anything else in my mobile device, for example, rather than whatever the work does. And if the MDM software has excessive controls, I don't want it. We had days where a BlackBerry device was given as an official corporate device. Today, everybody uses their personal device. There's barely I see any organizations giving corporate devices anymore. There's a change or a paradigm shift on how organizations are looking at this. Last but not least, we are seeing organizations simulating attack. Some call it adversary simulation attacks. Some call it breach and attack simulations. Essentially what that is that you get an organization, a third-party organization, a vendor, or maybe even your internal team, simulating an attack that's based on a pattern or behavior of maybe a nation state. So for example, around Asia, we covered APT41. So mature organization would say, okay, APT41 is operating within our environment. I want to make sure that we are ready for this kind of attacker. So then you actually have a live simulation of whatever tools, techniques, and procedures used by that attacker in order for them to breach your organization. So this is a more likely, a closer scenario than your, I would say now, being the traditional red team approach. Because the traditional red team approach would be like, I'm going to take a shotgun, I'm just going to shoot in all directions. If I hit something, I got in and I made my bonus that year. So this, in summary, is a quick look about technology and how security is going to move in the next year. Very great. Thank you. And we'd like to wish you a happy new year as we step into 2022. And we hope you continue to stay safe and secure. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us this week on SecurityLAH. Make sure to visit our website at securitylah.asia, where you can subscribe to the show in iTunes, Spotify, or via RSS so you'll never miss a show.